So as we celebrate Women's Day, that's exactly what today's National Day is all about. Yes, it's a big day, of course, for all women in the country and around the globe. President Jacob Zuma will address the 2017 National Women's Day celebrations at the Galeshewe Stadium in Kimberley later this morning. Now, last night, a women business executive spent a very cold night outdoors at the Constitutional Hills Women's Prison in the CEO Sleep Out initiative. Now, the initiative is part of the global CEO Sleep Out for positive social change. The CEO Sleep Out is aimed at raising funds for Door of Hope, which is a Johannesburg-based center that cares for abandoned babies. Participating women have called on female business leaders to invest in initiatives that seek to protect and uplift women.
What has become really quite concerning is that the amount of money, according to the most recent trialogue report, that the corporate sector is giving to NGOs is also declining. And the amount of money being given to government is increasing, which may have to do with the money that is being put into bursaries and scholarships. But why this is a problem is because there is already so little money going into these services. You need to bear in mind that the bulk of these services, the overwhelming bulk of services to women who experience violence, come from the NGO sector. They are not provided by government. And when international support is declining, at the same time as CSI support is declining, as is government support, you are reducing the amount of money and the safety that can be made available to women.
Now, a recent report release reveals that women are still being treated unfairly at work and at home, even though the topic by now should have reached maturity. According to a professor from the University of Stellenbosch Business School and editor of the 2017 SABC report, Fairness in Relation to Work at Work, Anita Bosch says that the underlying issue of power is the main driving force behind structural inequality. And for more on this, we're joined in studio by Dr. Amaleya Malka, who is a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Pretoria. Doctor, very good morning to you and welcome.
Good morning, Elvis.
Now, you would know that Nelson Mandela was a great feminist. Now, he said, and I quote, that as long as outmoded ways of thinking prevent women from making meaningful contributions to society, progress will be slow. As long as the nation refuses to acknowledge the equal role of more than half of itself, it is doomed to failure. Now, bearing in mind what he had said, what is the current status of women in this particular country in relation to economic emancipation?
I think a very important point, and obviously here as we're celebrating Women's Day, it's important to look at the progress we've made as well as where we're going to from a future point of view. According to recent stats from the quarterly labour force study of the last quarter from April through to June 2017, we've got 18.8 million women who are eligible for working in the workforce. But yet in the labour force, we only have 10 million of those working and 7 million employed and 3 million unemployed, with the balance being termed as economically inactive, so whether they're unable to work or for whatever other reasons. But the big challenge is that we find that women in the workforce are earning less than men for doing work of equivalent value, which is still the case, even though we've got legislation in place, and that on average is approximately 23% less. We also see that there is a lower proportion of women actively in the workforce in comparison to men. So we've got 54% of women in the labour force, but whereas we look at the male contingent, we've got 66% of men operating in the labour force. Then, importantly, I think it's also about looking at what we're looking at from a senior leadership perspective. Grant Thornton, for the last 13 years, have been doing a study looking at senior representation of women. And what we have seen in those last 13 years, though small, we have seen a 6% increase. So as we stand in their 2017 study, 1 in every 4 women globally is in senior management, so 25%. On a South African and African perspective, we see more promising results in terms of 29% of women moving through, which is a 1% increase from 2016. Still not enough, but at least it's heading towards the right direction. What was concerning, though, in the report was looking at companies where there is no representation of women in senior level. So this started, and incidentally, unfortunately, between 2016 and 2017, there was a 1% dip going from 33% to 34% in terms of that. What we have to see, though, is that within the work environment, it's not a case of women taking work away from men. It's about being able to increase and contribute to the economy. So rather than having this shrinking pie, we see cases of growing the pie and having more contribution.
But why do you think is there still the structural inequalities that we do see in the workplace, especially when it comes to women?
Unfortunately, a lot of it, and I was listening to your conversation with an earlier guest this morning, is we're still dealing with issues of patriarchy. So within the work environment, you may have all of this fantastic legislation, you've got someone who you can go and report an incident to, but what happens when you go home?
Yes.
You don't have that in place. You've got pervasive stereotypes that are coming through, whether it is in the family environment of what your expectations are as a woman in society, and from what mothers have gone through, what they've passed on to daughters who've inherited this as a way of culture. So there has got to be a balance between negotiating culture and conforming to those traditional norms, and still being able to be a valid contributing member of society.
So what do we then do, Doctor? How do we change this, and how do we improve the number of women occupying leadership roles, especially in listed companies, JSE companies and so forth?
There are a few points. One, we're already seeing from a grassroots upwards in terms of women in education. So we've got more and more girls and young ladies coming through the education stream, greater qualifications, and if you're more qualified, you've got more opportunity and more right to earning a better salary and entitled to a better position. Another key area is about mentorship, and more interestingly for me is about sponsorship. So from a mentorship point of view, you would be looking towards someone who's walked that journey and they will support and navigate. But sponsorship is where people are looking at you and they are understanding what your contributions are and potential value. So whether you've got a direct relationship with them or not, and they are advocates for your support. We've also got legislation within companies looking at diversity, and we see numerous reports, particularly from Credit Suisse, where they demonstrate that having more women and having a greater diversity within corporate boards is contributing to the bottom line. And let's face it, from a business point of view, it is all about delivering on the economic component. And also we've got meaningful contributions. So as someone engaged, you are being able to contribute to the economy and deliver.
Now, one of the most difficult points, I think, and components of gender equality and the principles thereof talk about work-life balance, and they also talk about career development. It's difficult, especially for when it comes to women. What is your perspective on this, and is there all-in-one winning formula that we can apply that could work for women in general?
To start for the last part first, I wish there was an all-in-one winning formula, and it's something that I discuss with numerous women on my radio show as well to try to understand. But there is no, unfortunately,
no magic bullet.
No magic book. We do have superwoman syndrome. We have got women doing what's termed as the second shift, because unfortunately, when we look at the whole picture, we've got 24 hours in a day. And the way that the work environment was structured was really about men's timetables, and also about looking at having a single income coming into the household. So the man would traditionally go out to work, and then the woman would be at home looking after the family, because you've got to have both needs within your life in order to function. The World Economic Forum looks at a global gender index, and what they established was that men's working days are actually shorter than women. So they work 7 hours and 47 minutes, and within that period, 1 hour and a half is allocated to unpaid labor. But in contrast to women, on average they work 8 hours and 39 minutes, and yet 4 hours and 47 minutes of that is unpaid labor. So women are doing more unpaid work than men, and also working for longer days. So that's one core issue, that we've got this unpaid component. In terms of the dynamics, I think it is all up to individuals from a choice perspective on how they do the shared workload, because we've got to be able to renegotiate the gender domestic division of labor. We live in more of an egalitarian society. We have got greater components from an equality perspective, and fairly we need to have this division of labor in the home so that both parties can go out and contribute.
On this Women's Day, how do we bring equilibrium, and what is your advice to women out there?
My advice is on an equilibrium basis. It's negotiating according to your own world and your own set of circumstances. I think a lot of the times women have to suffer from prevailing stereotypes. They've got societal pressures to conform. And it's up to them as individuals to navigate their worlds. Two examples which stand out for me, and I'll just mention briefly. For instance, Terry Falkvane, who was the former CEO of Prime Media. So in her space, she and her husband agreed that she would be the breadwinner and he would stay at home and look after the children. And she said that worked for them. But they had to deal with stereotypes coming through from society. Another instance is Dr. Evelyn Mushekwa, who is head of urology at Steve Biko Academic Hospital. Now, urology is very much a male domain dominated field, but yet she navigates this and she operates with a fine blend between looking at contributing to culture, maintaining aspects of culture, and letting components go. Culture is dynamic, and we live in a world which is constantly evolving, and it's up to us to take the good aspects and eradicate the bad.
Doctor, thank you so much for your time, and happy Women's Day to
Happy
you.
Women's Day. Thank you.
That was Dr. Amaleya Malka, of course, sitting in studio with us and talking to us about this very important day. It's your day today. If you're a woman out there, it's your day. Now, she is a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Pretoria.